right now is
All right, Mythic Plus is unplayable and Blizzard is panicking.
unplayable, and Blizzard is
Check this out.
panicking. It's probably in the worst state that I personally have ever seen. And if you ask,
So also what we're going to do in this video is we're just going to make a list here, and we're just going to kind of go through the list 1 through 10, kind of see what he talks about, and we'll just kind of discuss each point as we go through. So I'll just kind of bring this back and forth.
player base themselves, they actually agree on this. Even the players who have loved Mythic Plus in the past admit that it's bad. The players that even disliked it obviously think it's bad, and the players that don't even do it themselves now think it's bad as well. So now we're at the point where Retail WoW's beloved endgame loop is the worst it's ever been. But I actually think this is a good thing. Okay, now picture this. You just got off work and you got a couple hours to play the War Within. You're looking to upgrade your gear before raid this week, so you think, hey, what the hell, let's try to do a couple keys. You then spend 20 minutes looking for a party, 35 minutes to finish the dungeon, to then open up that chest at the end and get 50 gold.
That
so
sucks.
You just spent almost an hour.
So that could be our first point. Not enough loot. And the way it used to be is, I believe it used to be like based on your performance. So if you one chest it, you get 3 pieces. If you 2 chest it, you get 4 pieces. And then 3 chests, you get 5. I don't think it used to be like to that degree, but it was something like this. I want to say it went up to like 3 pieces max. And I think that Mythic Plus would be in a better state if it worked off a system like this. I think that's the whole kind of point of the timer, is not necessarily to push your key for upgraded crests, but they need to bring the whole loot system back into actual literal loot items instead of crests. So getting loot at the end of the dungeon, even if it's not like your BIS or whatever, you're not even going to equip it. You just spent an hour in LFG. You just spent an hour running a dungeon with people. You should probably get something at the end besides 10 crests or whatever it is now. So, okay, not enough loot. That's a first point.
Hour of your time, consumables, and food, repair costs, and even mental sanity for 50 gold. Now, let's just say you do get lucky enough to get a piece of loot. The chances of it even being something you need are slim to none. The reason why this is a problem is because you're running into what my biggest issue is with Mythic Plus, and it's the time investment to reward ratio is hot garbage. For the dad that busts his butt all day at work to come home and spend an hour per key to get nothing but a headache is a slap in the face. Now, why has this become such a realization? Why haven't we thought of this in previous expansions? Well, I think it's obvious now. One of the biggest eye-openers in the War Within on why Mythic Plus is so bad is because delves are so damn good. I mean, think about it. The second you start doing delves in the War Within, your interest for Mythic Plus starts tanking. I was clearing delves in 10 to 15 minutes. We were getting multiple pieces of loot an hour, getting really cool cosmetics tied with it, awesome little interactions. Hell, there's even a chance to...
Delves will get nerfed, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or whatever, but delves will get nerfed. Ian's already talked about this, so I would not be surprised if they get a nerf here pretty soon. Be interesting to see what happens there.
The map that gives you a juicy 610 piece of heroic gear. There's no headache of looking for a group. There's no relying on other players. There's no praying you get a piece of loot at the end.
Nice.
You don't have to invest an hour of your time to even get started. And man, honestly, my personal favorite though is the fact that you don't have to deal with the mental toll that comes with even participating in Mythic Plus. The entire gameplay loop of Mythic Plus incentivizes toxic behavior heavily.
Another problem with delves is it hurts the lower key range. People are skipping the 2 to 5 to 6 key range, and they're doing delves, and then they're just going into like 6, 7, 8s immediately, and the whole lower bracket of Mythic Plus is just getting skipped altogether. So for people like me who don't enjoy delves, most of the good players are out doing delves. People like me, I hate delves, so I queue it for Mythic Plus, and I get queued with the people who have no clue what the heck they're doing. So I do think that I do like how delves do give pretty good gear, especially for people who do enjoy them. I do think it does hurt the Mythic Plus pool a little bit.
You never want to take people you don't know because you could brick your key. You don't want to stay in a dungeon if players mess up constantly because you'll end up just wasting your time. You don't want to invite someone with a low Mythic IO score because you see them as a liability. The whole thing incentivizes nothing but...
So I guess that's a point. Like, delves are hurting. People are skipping low-end Mythic Plus due to delves. So I guess this means that delves gives too good of gear, and low-end Mythic Plus suffers. Because all the good players, I guess you could say, kind of skip that tier. That's kind of what I'm taking from
toxic and nasty gate-kept behavior, and it's an awful way to play an MMORPG. There's not one experience about Mythic Plus that I've seen that rewards cooperation, understanding, team building, or even simply just giving people a chance to learn mechanics together. To break it down simply, Mythic Plus is a timed gameplay loop that always incentivizes the meta. It always incentivizes the 1% of players who are the best at the game, and it leaves out the casual players who are looking to have a good MMO experience behind in the dust. And in MMORPG, shouldn't you incentivize group cooperation? Shouldn't you incentivize communication, working together as a team, and learning boss fights and mechanics? A big reason why I think hardcore WoW right now is booming at the moment is because the game pushes players to work together, to take their time, enjoy the experience, to clear dungeons.
I don't think you can compare Classic to Retail. It's two completely different games, two different player bases. People who like Retail will not like Classic. People like Classic will not like Retail. I don't think you can. I know that there is some overlap there because it's the same game name, but they are two completely different games, especially when you go into like the dungeon environment.
As a team and work together on downing bosses and getting that juicy loot in the end. I mean, in Retail, you could run 4 or 5 Mythic Plus keys and literally not say a single word to anybody in your team. There's no community. There's no sense of massive multiplayer online experience that Classic WoW has dominated with. Now listen, this isn't going to be a Classic WoW is awesome type of video because we all know the game has problems. And it's something that Retail WoW has been missing for a good amount of time now. In Retail, they push players so heavily to play Mythic Plus because it can give you some of the best gear in the game. And at this point, they design dungeons entirely with Mythic Plus in mind, rather than creating a badass dungeon that's fun to run through. So of course, when something is the main endgame loop of content, eventually you're forced to run it, no matter what you do. It gets to the point where you can't run delves anymore to progress your character. You can't just simply raid log anymore. You need some better ways to progress your gear and your character. So if you're a casual player, you're forced to step into Mythic Plus, and the punishment for not completing a key and failing that dungeon adds to so much anxiety and discouragement that no one wants to end up doing it. There have been more than a handful of times.
But if keys don't deplete, then I feel like the low-end bracket kind of dies. Like nobody's running 2s, nobody's running 3s anymore because I think it's kind of the same issue that we have with delves. People are kind of skipping the low-end bracket, and then if keys don't deplete, then it gets just as bad. I think the issue in Mythic Plus is more around the loot and the gear and how long it takes and the time investment. I don't know if keys not depleting is the move. Interesting idea, though.
Where me and my buddies work hard. We get that key built up. We're trying to do that 10 or 11. And then we finally get there. Listen, things happen, whether it be a bad teammate, whether it be timing, whether it be personal issues, whether it be not knowing mechanics, whatever it may be, we don't get the dungeon done on time. So
I think keys depleting adds to the ecosystem of what Mythic Plus is. You get the good players who accidentally had a key drop, who gets paired in with the players who might not belong at that key range, and they kind of mesh together. And I think you kind of want some of that overlap. You don't want the bad players to be in their own pool. You don't want the good players to kind of be in their own pool. You do want some overlap there, I feel like.
So not only did we waste an hour of our time, we wasted an additional hour because we have to rerun a dungeon in the previous tier to get back to where we were. I mean, it's obvious. No wonder Mythic Plus is so toxic because you get hammered with consequences if you don't complete your key on time. You miss out on somebody getting a piece of loot. You lose a bunch of gold by using consumables. You waste a total of, additional 2 hours to get back to where you were. All for a 40% chance at getting a piece of loot that most likely you don't even need. The more you look at the system, the more you realize it's a clown show and it's destroying the player base right now. And honestly, I think it's to the point where it's nearly unfixable and everyone can agree. The completed Mythic Plus runs per week compared from Dragonflight to the War Within is honestly quite
So this
different,
is
and it's
War
pretty
Within the
damn
blue?
scary if you look into it. The red
Oh,
line
wow.
here is Dragonflight Season 3, and the blue line is the War Within. And the War Within is getting its ass kicked significantly, and it isn't
Season
even
3
close.
was
The crazy
like
thing is that
peak Mythic
the player
Plus, so.
participation in retail WoW was absolutely booming just a few months ago, being one of the best it's ever been. So this is proof that Mythic Plus is easily in one of the worst states it's ever been, with the
So
ratio of players
Sorry, what's the green? Is that Season 4? Let's keep going.
participating in it being
I'm assuming
very
that's
low
Season 4, the
compared to
green.
other expansions. So yeah, of course, we just went through pretty much all of the major issues tied to Mythic Plus, but believe it or not, this is a good thing. Yes, you heard that right. I think Mythic Plus being nothing but hot dog water right now is a good thing.
Yeah, it's trash.
All of this data, all of this numbers, all of the complaints from the community and the highest performing players in the game that even do Mythic Plus right now is going to force Blizzard to innovate and create something new, or completely redesign the entire system in Mythic Plus in the coming future. So what can they change? What could be redesigned from Mythic Plus? Should they just scrap it entirely? Well, I'm going to be honest, I'm not too sure, but I have a pretty decent idea of some things that can be changed based off community response. Right off the bat, the number one complaint easily has to be the timer system. This is the core of Mythic Plus and the reason why the meta is always going to be preferred in any group you play with. It's the main reason why you play a certain spec or build to get more damage. It's the core problem with the entirety of...
I think the timer is a good thing, though. If you go back to a loot system to where you 3 chests, you get 5 pieces, you 2 chests, you get 4 pieces, I think the timer kind of is built into that sort of reward structure. So I'm not exactly against the timer. I don't think a lot of people are complaining really about the timer. I think it's more in terms of just how grindy it is and the
the
loot.
design. Think about it. Every decision you make is to save time, which is always ticking in this game mode. It destroys the game by only being about efficiency rather than fun, creativity, and cooperation. I mean, hell, you can't die in Mythic Plus without there being a 15-second cutoff on your timer, which then leaves players pissed off and angry anytime anyone dies in a group. This then leads to players not only being punished by the game, but also being punished by their community members, by either people quitting, leaving the group early, calling you bad, insulting you, you name it, they're gonna do it. I mean, why in the hell are players being punished for not being efficient? The only punishment that should ever exist in Mythic Plus is that if you don't time your key, you simply don't advance to the next tier. If you remove punishments, a good portion of the toxicity will evaporate. If you remove the timer as well, you incentivize team play, cooperation, group communication.
So no timer and the key doesn't deplete. Okay.
And with that, a massive amount of toxicity will disappear. Now, I need you to listen carefully on these last couple ones because they might be a little bit of a hot take. I think one of the final ways you could turn Mythic Plus into something truly great and positive is by removing the ability to spam it over and over again. I know what you're thinking, but Sky, I love spamming Mythic Plus dungeons over and over. It's a great endgame loop. In my experience in life, the less you give something to someone, the more they actually want it. If you give players the ability to specifically run that same content over and over again, they'll stop being interested very, very quickly. I mean, think about raids, for example. You can only run them once a week, and you have the...
I don't think you want to do this because you take people out of the pool. I think, once again, this is something else that kind of hurts that whole Mythic Plus sort of ecosystem. You want people to be in the pool. You want people to be playing to the game. And if you lock them out, there's less people playing the game. So I don't know if this is the move, a daily lockout like this. I kind of get the idea, though. I mean, it'd probably be fine for casual players, but for people who are wanting to play with friends or whatever, you know, say your friend did a Siege of Borealis earlier in the day, that means you can't play with your friend now because he's now locked out. He might just be locked out of the loot, I guess, but it'd be essentially wasted time for him for you to run with him, right? Because he wouldn't get any loot, or for him to run with you, I guess. So I'm not sure I like that idea either.
the same opportunity at loot from Mythic Plus. So here's what I propose. You make each dungeon on a daily lockout. You make the Mythic Plus key global, meaning that whatever key level you're on, you can run that key level for any dungeon of your choosing every 24 hours. And
I like that. any key you want. That's interesting.
To make
Okay.
up for this, you increase the rewards earned from each dungeon run. Now, what does all of this solve? Well, let me break it down to you simply. By eliminating the timer and taking away punishments from not completing a key, you incentivize your player base to work together, learn mechanics, organize a group for fun and core RPG aspects.
I don't think that's what Mythic Plus is, though. I think you got to have the timer. I think keys have to deplete. I think people just want to be incentivized for their time. If I spend an hour, like he said, 2 hours in a dungeon, a key depletes, I have to run again. I feel like the loot maybe should be dispersed per boss or something to where if you get 3/4 of the way through and your key depletes, you get something from it, you know? Maybe you get crests per boss kill or something. Maybe the loot's at the end and you get something per boss kill. But
to
yeah,
acquire
I don't
loot
know.
rather than being all about efficiency. Putting each dungeon on a daily lockout with a global wide key level progression will limit players from spamming it over and over again, yes, but you make the time investment to reward ratio vastly improve by increasing the amount of loot rewards you earn from each dungeon.
Has to be more
this
loot.
can either be
Has to
with
be.
the, classic
Takes
one
way too
boss
long.
kill, one piece of loot. Or you can have 4
There you
pieces
go.
of loot distributed at the end of the dungeon rather than just 2. This pushes the developers to design the game mode for new players, casual
The problem with loot, though, for Mythic Plus that I always hear is it can be farmed indefinitely. Which means if you give too much loot, people will literally gear out in a week, which I don't think is great design. Because you want the vault to matter. You want them, you want there to be some sort of progression system. You don't want people to just knock it out in a week and be done with it. So you don't want to give too much loot, but I do think it is way too sparse. The difficulty is too high and the loot is too low. Those two have to kind of meet somewhere, right? And especially low-end Mythic Plus, which is absolutely terrible right now.
players and
'Cause
even
everybody's just
slightly
doing delves.
advanced WoW players, rather than it being about the 1% of players who want to spam Mythic Plus over and over and over again, and that's the only content they do. Lastly, one of my favorite
That's all I do.
additions could be a token system they used back in the Burning Crusade. In the Burning Crusade, after you killed every boss in Heroic Dungeon, you were rewarded with a badge of justice that you
Huge. I wish I added this. If I remember right, in Wrath of the Lich King, might have been in Burning Crusade too. There was a token system that was based on like a weekly. There's a weekly quest for it. There's like multiple currencies. Maybe you got one for each boss kill, or there's one at the end of the dungeon. You got a token, and you get X amount of tokens. You trade it in for a piece of gear. This is really nice because if you're missing a piece of gear or two that you just can't seem to get from your vault or whatever, you just go spend the currency on it. Now we kind of have that already with the crafting system, but the crafting system is pretty expensive. It costs a lot of gold. It takes a lot of valor stones. It takes a lot of investment. Versus a badge system or a token system like this, I feel like would not require quite as much investment. You're just killing bosses. You're not spending tons of gold and valor stones.
could accumulate and save to
And
spend at a
crests,
vendor
tons of
to give
crests.
you a juicy piece of loot of your choosing. And this
Yeah.
is very, very critical back
I guess
then
it was in
for
BC.
filling out your character to make your progression a lot more smooth and make your character feel more powerful. They can even implement at this vendor
This
the
would be
most
huge.
highly sought after items from every dungeon and give you a guaranteed way to earn
I have no clue why that's not in the game. I've been asking for that for years now.
that piece of loot at a high level by simply just completing your everyday activities or even
make
every
farming
other
on
day
alts so much
activity.
easier.
By implementing all of this, you bring the core RPG aspects back into the game by working together as a team. The time investment to reward ratio is through the roof at this point. It incentivizes you to play alternate characters because gearing up becomes so much better and smoother, and because there is no timer or major penalties, the toxic and meta behavior will be vastly reduced, and the player base will be focused on clearing dungeons as a team rather than efficiency. I want to hear your honest thoughts about this in the comment section below because this is a very, very important topic. I don't have the most pull with the devs at all, believe me, I'm just a small YouTuber, but this can be something that they watch and they see directly how the community responds. I've always loved to use my communication and connections personally as a YouTuber to try and voice your opinions on what you truly believe could work and be improved upon.
Okay, well, there we go.